Thank you. Look at that. What kind of an outfit is this, Jim? Who's in charge? Well, Jim, thank you. It's good to see you, my friend. You go back a good many years like I do. You think you're better at this than I am?
Do you want to just hold on to it?
All right. Now, Jim and I have lived about 1/3 of the history of our country. If you have your abacus handy, you can multiply 80 times 3 and subtract it from 2012, and it takes you right back to the beginning of the country. You look quizzical. You don't believe me. You have your pencil out. Yes. No abacus, but when I drove over the bridge, the Key Bridge coming here this morning, I mused to myself that when I first arrived here in 1957, out of the Navy and went to work for Dave Dennison, a congressman from Ohio, it was farmland on this side, the Virginia side of the Key Bridge. Amazing. Jim mentioned the book, and the fact that we're giving all of my proceeds to military charities has allowed me to be just absolutely scandalously forward about selling the book. And I encourage everyone to get out your Christmas card list and send a copy, not the softback, the hardback, to everyone you know, because the proceeds go to a good cause. I've been out speaking to about 18 military bases and had a terrific time. I've had a chance to thank them personally and sign photographs with men and women who served in uniform over in Iraq or Afghanistan or Korea, Japan, somewhere around the world, and to thank them and to thank their families. I went to Leavenworth, Fort Leavenworth, to speak, and was asked while I was there signing books if I would be willing to speak to, I think it was 1,492 majors in the military. And the amphitheater was just packed. The upper galleries were packed with majors in the military. And a fairly, I guess 10% were also foreign from other countries that were participating in the courses that were offered there at Fort Leavenworth. And I answered a bunch of questions and talked about one thing and another, and finally one person said to me, asked the question, he said, "What do you worry about when you're thinking at night? What bothers you? What concerns you? And you know, I was asked exactly that same question a decade before in my confirmation hearing in 2001. I think it was Senator Roberts of Kansas who asked me that question, and my response was, you know, I hadn't thought about it, but I just simply said, I worry about intelligence. I worry about the fact that we live in a dangerous and difficult world, and there are a number of closed societies. It's very difficult to really have a good grip on what's taking place in the world, even when we were looking at the Soviet Union in the 70s and 80s. Year after year, we found that there were things we didn't know, and it was worrisome. And of course, it's even more worrisome. It was more worrisome in 2001 if you think of the fact that weapons have become increasingly lethal, and the proliferation of highly lethal weapons has increased. So that was my answer in 2001. And that raced through my mind when this major asked me the question. And I also thought about North Korea or Iran, the problems of terrorism. And out of my mouth was something quite different. I said, what worries me most, this was probably 4, 5, 6, 8 months ago at Fort Leavenworth. I said, what worries me most is American weakness. Throughout my adult life, the United States has been an important presence in the world. The fact that we've existed and the fact that we've behaved responsibly with respect to how we managed our economy, that we behaved responsibly in terms of seeing that we had capabilities, that provided a stability in the world, a deterrent. It suggested to people that the United States was there. We were part of the rib cage in the world, the structure. And people had to take account of that. And as a result, the world certainly is far from a perfect place. It's a dangerous place, and we know that. But it was a better place over the past period of decades because of the United States and because of our capabilities. I think it was probably 8 or 10 months ago I got a call from a Southeast Asian statesman, and he said something to the effect that, Don, I never dreamt I'd live to see the day when adults in the White House would be modeling America after Europe, a failed model. And of course that's basically what we're doing. You cannot accumulate and incur, what is it today or yesterday, $16 trillion of debt, and not place an almost impossible burden on the next generation. We have demonstrated to the world and to this statesman that said that to me, that we are, as a nation, not behaving in a responsible way from the management of our economy. And that signal goes out across the globe, and it's registered in people's heads, and it gives them the freedom to know they can do things they otherwise wouldn't have been able to do. The idea that they may cut another $500 billion, $500 billion on top of the, I think, 400 and some odd billion they've already cut out of the Defense Department, also sends a signal out around the world that the United States will not have the kinds of capabilities that we need. When I came to Washington in the Eisenhower administration and then served in Congress in the Kennedy and Johnson administrations, the United States was spending about 10% of our GDP on defense. Today we're spending about 4%, less than 4%, depending on how you count it. So the debt and the deficits have not been a result of defense budgets. It's been a result of entitlements. And we've gone in the defense establishment from 10% of GDP in the 50s and 60s down to 4% and in decline. I think that it's important for all of us to take account of the critical importance of this election. I was just being interviewed on a radio program, and before I say another word, let me just thank the Leadership Institute for all you folks do, and for those of you who support it and those who participate with it. It's a terrific organization. What it's doing is enormously important, and I congratulate all of you for your involvement, for being here, and thank you for it. It's something that deserves recognition, and I know Morton Blackwell's not here, and he's, I guess, en route overseas for a meeting of some kind, but I do appreciate it. But I remember my senior banquet when I was in college. The speaker, what he said was basically that each of us has a responsibility to help guide and direct the course of this country. And throughout our history, when things got bad, good people changed their priorities, got out of their chairs, and did more than they were doing previously. They were energized by their concern, and the pendulum gets shoved too far to one side. Good people get out of their chairs and push it back. And if there's ever been a time in my 80 years where good people needed to get out of their chairs and push that pendulum back, this is it. And it is particularly important for the coming generations that we do not leave them a country where the youngsters coming along will have to look forward to a future that was not as bright and not as optimistic as it has been for each of us in this room. With that, I'll stop and answer questions. Actually, I'll answer the ones I know the answers to, and I'll respond carefully, possibly even refer the questions that I don't know the answers to, and I worry about the first guy up on his feet. You know, the guy with his hand up, it's always difficult. The first question, so I'll go over here. I'll come back to you, but I want you to catch your breath. Yes, sir. Oh, plenty. Any big bureaucracy's got waste. My goodness. We put in a national security personnel system when I was Secretary of Defense the second time. And I was not out of there 2 years before the unions and the White House just gutted the national security personnel system. It was, I have to confess, it was revolutionary. We put in a provision where there would be pay for performance. What a radical thought. Imagine. And of course the unions fought it in Congress, they fought it in the White House, and the minute I left and President Bush left, they gutted it. So there's plenty that can be done. I think, I'm going to be off a little bit, but when I was there in the 1970s in the Pentagon, the Defense Authorization Bill, I think, was 4 pages. And today it's something like 474 pages. The degree of micromanagement, you know, it's kind of like Gulliver. With the Lilliputians putting a thread over Gulliver, no one thread made any difference. But in the aggregate, all of those threads created a situation where Gulliver couldn't get up. And that's basically what's happened in the Pentagon. But there's plenty of waste there, just as there is in every department of government, federal, state, and local. Why? Because it's other people's money. People just don't behave with respect to other people's money the way they behave with respect to their own money. And trying to get that into people's heads in government is just an enormously difficult task. Yes, sir.
Mr. Rumsfeld, I wanted to ask you about the word that's been censored out of the Democratic platform, the word that the president's spokesman won't utter, and the word that gives fits to the State Department, Jerusalem, the city that the president hasn't visited during his presidency. Jerusalem, why is that word so troublesome for the current administration, and what should be the policy of the next administration concerning Jerusalem? Thank you.
Well, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but I thought countries got to pick where their capitals would be. I don't find it complicated. I must say that the relationship between the United States and Israel today is worrisome. And that country is an enormous success story in a tough part of the world, with neighbors that don't want them there, with the leaders in Iran, the Ayatollahs announcing almost daily that Israel should be eradicated or eliminated or shoved into the sea. The idea that we would be anything other than a supporter and friendly to that country, the democracy, a successful economic entity in that part of the world, it seems to me is unfortunate. I think the other word they took out of the platform was God. So they had quite a week.
make it easy for you as the holder of the mic here. I've been reading your book recently.
There'll be a quiz later.
There'll be a quiz later. And you engaged in a successful grassroots campaign to become elected to Congress. What are your thoughts on what happened at the Republican convention last week, where the rules were changed so that delegates are chosen from more of a top-down direction rather than bottom-up?
They say confession's good for the soul. I've been out in Montana, and I didn't know that they'd done that, and I don't know what I think about it. And I'd have to read it and reflect on it and find out what the motivation was, because I just don't know. So pass that mic to somebody who'll ask me a question I know the answer to. I didn't see a newspaper for 2 weeks, and it was a blessing. Way in the back. You.
I did my research on Europe and end-of-life care, and I'm aware of the enormous impact of the debt on the next generation. Is there any risk that as that becomes such a huge issue and one that's cultivated with the younger generation, that we'll be pushing them towards the European way of thinking on end-of-life care?
I suppose there is a risk. I don't know where a tipping point comes, but it's very clear to me that the European model is failing, that the social network has grown to the point that there are so many people receiving and not enough people providing. And here in the United States, I don't know what the number is, but it's something in the mid 40% of the American people are receiving. And at some point, they're going to want to vote for people who will increase what they receive. And well, I think it was Mrs. Thatcher who said at some point, talking about socialism, she said at some point the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money. And I think that's at some point there is a tipping point where you can't push that pendulum back where it belongs. Way in the back. Yes, you need a mic, which is en route.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. As Secretary of Defense, you had to deal with a lot of foreign countries having rebellions where groups would join together for a common cause of destroying, let's say, an enemy of some sort. But when that final task was done, they would dissipate and no longer be a unified force and no longer be a governing force. What kind of lessons do you think that takes into that we could apply to the United States system, where we so frequently unify against a force in the United States, but do not usually unify for something?
I guess I don't know if it's true. I do think there have been periods in my life where we've seen the United States unify in favor of something as well as against something. Fear focuses the mind, so there's no question but that if you're against something because you're fearful of it, it is probably easier to get people mobilized against that thing. And the old adage is what politicians need is an enemy, and something they can attack, something they can go after. And so your point certainly has validity. But I think I came away from watching, I've been up too late watching these conventions. And, but I must say, I think the message that Governor Romney is putting out of Believe in America is a good message. It's the right message. And it is he's trying to mobilize people for something, to recognize the values and the principles that help build this great country into what it is and what it has been and what it should be prospectively. It may be harder to do that, to be for something than against something, but I think it's doable. Yes.
Secretary Rumsfeld, first, it's an honor to hear remarks from you this morning.
Thank you.
Second, my question is, do you think the nature of strategic thought has shifted away from Mackinder and increasingly towards...
Away from what?
Mackinder and Halford Mackinder, and increasingly towards Mahan, as in its rejection of forces that occupy territory towards forces that control access to territory? And if so, what should the national security community do with this shift? And then where do you think the biggest growth area will be within cybersecurity?
Holy mackerel. Those are good questions. As you were stating your first question on the issue of access or anti-access, what came through my mind was the fact that there's a continuing focus on prevailing in a war. And it seems to me that the focus should be on not winning a war, but not having a war. And the way you don't have a war is as Dwight Eisenhower said, peace through strength. It's to be so capable and so strong that anyone looking at you knows it is not in their interest to risk coming at you. And that means that you can't have one capability, because for every offense there's a defense. For every defense there's an offense. And what you need is a balanced capability that deters and dissuades. It seems to me that people who get hung up on an army or a navy or an air force, people are not going to go after those for the United States. We have very capable armies, navies, and air forces. So what do? They go after you through asymmetric approaches, through using suicide bombers and the like. And for each thing when I was President Reagan's Middle East envoy, and I remember going over there right after the Marines were killed at the Beirut airport, 241 Marines and Navy corpsmen. What happened? The crazy zealot, not a coward, because he killed himself. He drove that truck right into that barracks and killed 241 of our military personnel. What did they do? They immediately started putting revetments around the building, concrete, so that the person couldn't drive another truck into the barracks where their military was located. So what did they do? They started lobbing rocket-propelled grenades over the revetments. So the next thing, you go down to the Corniche in Beirut, and they were draping metal mesh, wire mesh, over the buildings. Why? So that when the rocket-propelled grenades would hit the mesh, they'd bounce back. So what'd they do next? They started killing Americans going to and from work and picked out soft targets. There is no perfect defense, which is what was the essence of President George W. Bush's policy after 9/11, that you can't treat the people like common criminals, bank robbers or murderers, indict them in absentia, as Osama bin Laden had been indicted in absentia. You have to put pressure on them wherever they are. And you have to put pressure on the countries that are hospitable to them. And it seems to me that we have to get it in our head that we cannot have a single capability or even several capabilities. We have to have, as the preeminent nation in the world, we have to have a set of capabilities that create a broad deterrent, and we have to be willing to recognize that people are going to try to find ways around those capabilities and be willing to address that as it happens. Yes. Do you have a mic?
How about an easy question?
Now you're talking my language.
Can you tell me one experience that taught you the most?
A little louder for the people down, way down at the end here.
Is this better?
Better.
Okay. Can you tell me one experience that taught you the most during your professional career? You know, some advice for young professionals who are
I
just
can't
starting
even
out.
remember back to my entire career. What experience? You know, all of us, and you know, unless you're a Mozart or an Einstein, and you go off in a room by yourself and do something brilliant, all of the rest of us do what we do with other people. And we learn as we go, and we do things, and we find something works and something doesn't work. And it's those sequential experiences of life that enable a person to gather information, gather ideas, lessons, good and bad lessons, to be sure, because nobody's perfect. And I suppose a different way of asking that question, what's the smartest thing you ever did? And that was marry my wife, Joyce. 58 years ago. Yes, sir. There's a mic handy right there.
Thank you. Thanks again for speaking with us. I wanted to get your opinion on recent developments in Afghanistan, green on blue attacks, where Afghan security forces are turning around and opening fire on American soldiers that are training and arming them. There's been over 100 NATO soldiers, many of them American, killed since May 2007. And we've seen a recent spike in these attacks with 12 in the month of August alone. Do you see these attacks continuing, and should we reconsider either way, our current timeline for withdrawal in Afghanistan?
What's clear is that their Taliban are being successful in infiltrating Afghan security forces. So as the Afghans recruit people and bring them in, their screening system is imperfect. Ours is too. I mean, you think of what happened at Fort Hood, where I don't know how many people were killed by this fellow. I guess he's not been convicted yet, I should say. It's pretty clear that he did it. Everyone saw him do it. But I think that what you're going to have to do is, as long as you're going to be providing that kind of an assistance, you're going to have to get a much better grip on the screening system before they bring people in, because these aren't just citizens. These are people who are there for a good reason, and that's to kill somebody. And it's not hard. I mean, it is not hard for a person to go after a soft target, someone who's not expecting it, and not a. It doesn't take a battleship or an aircraft carrier or a tank. It's just a matter of as we see every day. I don't know. I was in Chicago for a wedding last weekend, and I think there were something like 17 people killed in Chicago last weekend. The press said. So it's happening all across the globe. What makes it important in Afghanistan is that it's our people in uniform, and that we ought to be doing a better job in organizing and training and equipping and screening these folks. Yes, someone. You decide who you want to give the mic to. There you go.
Thank you, sir. Can you comment on the extent of the damage that these recent high-level security leaks have had with respect to international alliances? And also, when was it that this type of activity was accepted? I mean, you don't see people being hauled up in front of courts to address these crimes.
The questions about the leaks that have been widely discussed in the media recently. Our country has capabilities, and one of the capabilities is to go to people in other countries and ask their cooperation. Ask them to help us give us some information. We go to foreign intelligence services and military intelligence services in other countries and ask them to help us. Give us information. Give us access to agents and the kind of information that will enable us to better protect the American people. To the extent we leak information, whether out of the White House or anywhere else, what the signal goes out around the world: don't cooperate with the United States. If you're going to be put at risk because of your response to the United States request to give some assistance, if you're going to be put at risk personally, or if your intelligence service is going to be weakened because of your cooperation with the United States, people are not going to cooperate. So to the extent we have a certain reach because of our own assets, maybe electronic, maybe human intelligence assets, we have a certain reach, the multiplier effect that we get by cooperating with other countries is gone. Only an idiot would cooperate with a government anywhere in the world that cannot keep a secret and that compromises that information. And it hurts. It hurts us a great deal, and it hurts us in terms of our ability to protect the American people. Second, we have people out on the front lines. We have intelligence agents, we have military operatives, and to the extent information flows out of the White House or out of any other agency of government, and that enables people to understand better exactly how we do what it is we do, we put our own people at risk. And the hemorrhaging out of the White House, and it clearly is coming out of the White House, is so grossly irresponsible, harmful to our national security, and dangerous to our men and women in uniform. It's serious. Boy, you know, originally there were only 2 hands up. Now when I turn, there are 5 up. Yes, ma'am. I'm getting the hook, so this is the last question.
You mentioned Fort Hood. Why in the world would the Army not have thrown that stupid major out a long time before he had the chance to do what he did? He had horrible evaluations.
Yeah, I don't have any idea. It is sad. I mean, think of the people who died because of you have to worry when you get so sensitive about using a word. We talked about Jerusalem. We talked about God. This administration is unwilling to even use the phrase Islamist. And the Attorney General testified up on the Hill and managed through circumlocution and euphemisms to get through an entire hearing without even mentioning that one of the significant events in the world is the rise of radical Islamists that are engaging in practices which kill innocent men, women, and children. And he won't say it. I think it's that attitude or that pattern that's worrisome. Now, this is the last question, I'm told. You pick them. I don't want to decide. I mean, look at all the hands up. My golly. Do a good one now. Don't mess up. This better be a home run ball, this question.
No pressure, right? I'm more looking at we're studying moral values, and I want to know from your opinion, as young conservatives, how can we go about to launch an initiative to promote moral values that are better for the youth so that we can grow up in a better world?
Well, I think supporting something like the Leadership Institute. I mean, here are a group of people who don't have to do it, but who give money, who dedicate their lives to recruiting and training all kinds of young people with fundamental principles, the values you're talking about, with the strong national defense, with the responsible fiscal policy. I looked at the charter of the Leadership Institute, and it's admirable. And I don't know what I could add to that. The important thing to do is to never underestimate your power as an individual. It's very easy for people to sit back and say, oh, I'm just one person, what can I do? Well, the answer is a whale of a lot is what you can do. And think of it like a pond, and you take a pebble, and you drop the pebble in the pond, and out go those rings. And that is what you do, each of you, each of us, I should say. We have, sure, we're just one person. But by golly, we can make those ripples go out everywhere we go by how we behave ourselves, the things we say, the things we do, what we give our time and energy and resources to. And it seems to me that is what I would say. Don't underestimate what you as an individual can do, because the collective force of people who care and people who are rooted and who understand what built this country. It didn't just happen. We didn't just arrive out of nowhere. This was built through blood and sweat and tears and effort. So let's quit having breakfast and get out there and do it.
I've got something to give to you, so.